Oh, you can't see it very much? Maybe try a little bit. Is there any dot? Okay, welcome to office hours, everyone. Tonight I'm going to be going over problems 2, 3, 6, and 7, and possibly 8 on problem set 5. I might jump around a little bit in terms of the year just to try and cover the more substantial ones first. Tonight we're going to be having Kathy Beckett's going to be taking questions for you guys. So if you have any questions while the session is going, just email her and she'll check at least after every problem and maybe a couple times intermediate if it's a long problem. So if you guys can't hear me, if you don't understand a certain concept or want me to go over something again and be clearer, just send her and we'll answer and we'll do that. So okay, so let me just open up the problem set. Okay, so I'm going to start with number 2 on problem set 5, which is the question about Toledo's Old West End and the stadium that they are thinking about building. The problem says that you're the city manager of Toledo, Ohio. The city wants to build a new stadium for the Mud Hens. The architect says it would cost $14 million to build. To build the proposed design. It will be built on a vacant city-owned lot in the Old West End, an area of Toledo that is gentrifying. The stadium will last for 20 years. And the Mud Hens bring in about $1 million in tax revenue to the city each year. So $1 million. Okay. And it says we can ignore time discounting for now. Okay, so part A are the implicit and explicit costs. So just to review really quick with you guys what the definition of an explicit and implicit cost. I'm going to open up the slide. This is the lecture 6 slide if you guys are wanting to find it at all. Okay, actually, I don't know if there is a specific definition slide. Okay, okay, so this is good that I looked it up, but I don't see a specific definition slide in PowerPoint, but the implicit, explicit costs are basically just like the price tag of the project. So in this case, it would be $14 million to build the stadium. So the explicit costs are $14 million. That makes sense. I mean, it's explicit and it's stated, so it is explicit cost. The implicit cost of building the stadium is an implicit cost is thought of like an opportunity cost of the project. So, for example, in this situation, let me look up what I think it said that there was another project that they could do for $10 million on the same land. So let me see. Okay. Yeah, so the implicit cost, the price that you could sell that vacant lot for. So they assume in the slides it tells you more about this. It says that you could probably sell the vacant land for $10 million. So this is an important number to know when you're calculating, when we get to calculating the implicit cost. So, and the economic profit, especially. So vacant, it would be worth the $10. Okay, so okay, so this is the implicit cost. Like the opportunity cost of this project. If you spend this $14 million, you have to also take in that you're foregoing $10 million that you would have received in revenue had you just sold it as it is. So the next part of the question is part B. How much revenue will the stadium bring in over its lifetime? Revenue here is corresponds with the revenue, the tax revenue, so $1 million a year. And it says that the stadium will last 20 years. So that revenue is 20 million. Okay, part C is where we have to start thinking a little bit harder, I think. It says, what is the accounting profit and what is the economic profit? So if you're just, so the accounting profit is basically, okay, so the accounting profit in this case would be basically just your revenue minus your expenses. It's what you would show on the books. So if you're this local government, you're going to look at it and say, look, we purchased this land for we purchased this stadium for $14 million and received 20 million out of it, and therefore over the course of 20 years we earned $6 million. So that's kind of like the explicit profit that you would see written down in a book about that is kind of narrating how much money the stadium ended up earning. So in this case, it would be the revenue minus the explicit cost, which is 20 million minus minus the 14 million. So the accounting profit would then be $6 million. But this isn't the end of the story, which is why we're going to calculate the economic profit as well. So this says, look, we made a good decision. We made $6 million. Look at our accounting profit. But actually, that doesn't tell you anything about whether or not that was the best decision to have made. So in order to calculate, to find out if that was a good decision to make, that economic profit comes in. It'll be, we also take into account the other options that we would have had. And so in this case, we're going to look at also the implicit cost. So it would be, so for economic profit, I'm going to write it down here. It's going to be revenue minus your explicit cost still. But also, you're going to subtract the cost, the amount that you would have received by using a different plan, which is your implicit cost right here. So this is telling you that, okay, so the books say we earned $6 million. That's this part right here. But if you subtract what you could have got from other situations, then you'll know how much you actually made in terms of economic profit. So if you look at, so we'll make $6 million on this choice, on building the stadium and getting $20 million out of it. We'll make $6 million on that choice. But if we would have taken this choice, just selling the lot for vacant, then we would have gotten $10 million. So we also need to subtract that out, because, I mean, if you just look at it logically, $10 million for a vacant lot versus $6 million in accounting profit over 20 years. Like, this is better, right? $10 million is greater than $6 million. And so it makes sense that we also subtract implicit costs, 10 million. And we're left with negative $4 million, right? So what is this saying? This is saying that had we taken our other option, which we looked at as an implicit cost, then we would have made $4 million more. So this is a negative. By choosing to build the stadium, you have negative $4 million in economic profit. You could have done $4 million better. If we looked at the situation the other way around, with this as our plan of interest and this as our alternative, then what we would have got these would have been switched, right? This would have suddenly been the explicit cost, $10 million, and this would have been the implicit cost. And so the economic profit would have been $10 million minus the revenue that we could have gotten from this option, which is again 20 million minus 14 million. And we would get 10 million minus 6 million for 4 million. So that would be the case if we like switched it and looked around, like this is our plan and this is our alternative. But in the problem we have, this is the plan and this is the alternative. I'm just showing you guys so that you see that they're basically going to be inverses if these are in fact the best two options. Okay, so part D says, should you build a stadium? Kathy, what do you think? No, Kathy says we shouldn't build a stadium because we're not having, it's not the best option, right? But we're losing $1 million. So that's right. Okay, part E says, now assume that you decide to auction off the vacant lot and build the community center somewhere else. 5 entities show up to the auction. One of those is AT&T, who will pay $10 million for the lot, and a community center that can pay $100,000. All other bid between these values. According to the principle of the rationing function of price, what should happen? So the rationing function of price says that changes in price distribute scarce goods to those consumers who value them most highly. So we want to determine who values this land the most highly. You might think that if you sold it to the bidder for $100,000 for a good cause, perhaps like a nonprofit, that they are valuing it more highly. They just don't have enough money to pay $10 million like AT&T does. And so you might be tempted to sell it to a nonprofit or that community center. But the rationing function of price says that the nonprofit isn't offering us $10 million because they don't value it at $10 million. They value it at $100,000. And so if we're going to sell it to the person that values it the highest, we will still sell it to AT&T. In fact, if we sell it to the community center and the rationing function of price is correct, what will probably happen afterwards is they'll sell a lot to the AT&T and make $900,000. Let's see, no, it'd be $9,000 on it. And I would want to do that too if I was a nonprofit and just go move somewhere else. So AT&T would still end up probably getting it. They would still pay $10 million for it. This would be that the city would get much less revenue, right? The end being the same, AT&T has the land, the community center still doesn't, and the city is about $9,900,000 having to the community center. Okay, so part F says assume AT&T wins the auction in the Old West End. When the store opens, they offer $9 an hour to new employees. They hire 10 people, all of whom are working for other retail stores in the area, and all of whom chose where they work based only on wages offered. What does this tell us about the wages of AT&T employees versus other employees in the area? So it says that AT&T is paying $9 an hour to employees, and then get 10 new employees, and that all these people had jobs before, but they left those jobs to work at AT&T, and that their only reason for doing so was that they were paid more because they only worked in these locations based on the wages offered. And so what we can assume is that AT&T is paying more than other retailers in the area, because that's why anyone would leave their job to go to this new job if their only consideration is wages. Okay, so that's question 2. Do we have any questions or anything that come in email? Okay, so we don't have any questions on number 2. If you have some, send them in now, and we'll take a look at those. I'll just give you guys a minute in case you need a minute to type it up, but then I'll move on. We still not have any questions. So we still don't have any questions, so I'm going to move on to number 3. It's about corn production. Okay, so the question says, consider the market for corn production with many buyers and sellers. Graph the supply and market on the left, and on the right, show the average total cost curve and marginal cost curves for a typical corn farm. Part A says that first we're going to graph a scenario where individual corn farms are earning an economic profit. So that's supply and demand over here. And then I'm going to do average total cost and marginal cost over here. Okay, so I'm just going to assume theoretical lines in their places for supply and demand, and make them work in a way that will produce economic profit on the side. So this is just acceptable. We always know that supply is up sloping and demand is down sloping. So I can just say that this is prices $2 for a year of corn, $2 for a year of corn. Okay. So over here I have marginal cost and average total cost. In order for there to be an economic profit, it needs to be this price needs to be on an upward sloping part of the marginal cost curve, and it's going to be the marginal cost curve will need to be above the average total cost curve. So this is how marginal cost curve is typically shaped, which is then average total cost curve is shaped that. Then we'll produce to then at the price point 2, we just follow it out until we get to the marginal cost curve. This is one thing I went over this so in a different column from the last section, but I'm not sure if I covered it as well for the students online or if you guys can, so I can go over it again now. One student said one of the things that he got out of the last that it made more sense to him why he would go out to the marginal cost curve where it's sloping upward. And so I'm going to explain that. It could have been the case if we had a marginal cost curve, in which there are two places where which happens on this marginal cost curve happens right here, and also happens right here. So how do we know that we stop and calculate economic profit as this area? I'm going to draw this in blue actually. If we go from this point, then this is the marginal cost and the average total cost curve makes this area our total profit, or total economic profit. But it also could have been the case that the first point where price equals 2, the profit is much different, right? It will like marginal cost, the average total cost curve, and then we have negative profit, right? Here. Obviously, the opposite makes a little sense in this area. The marginal cost curve is above the average cost curve. That means when we're in a place where the average total cost curve is the marginal profit curve, we're not in the zone of economic profit yet, and we're probably having negative profit. So this obviously makes sense when you draw it out. But another way that you can remember it is just by thinking through it. Okay, so we have our so marginal cost represents the so marginal cost represents the cost of one additional year performance. So if it's the case that someone is offering you $2 per year of corn, and you already have a lot of things that you into in terms of the long-term economic outlook. So in the short term, what are you supposed to do? if someone is offering you $2 and it costs you less than $2 to produce more of those, even if it's the case in the long term, you're not making back all your money yet, it's still the case that you're limiting your losses a little bit. So, for instance, at this point right here, much of the extra soil in that one spot, and extra water in that one spot, it costs you more than that. You're not going to say yes. But if it's the case that you're right here, just before that $2 price point at one, if someone comes up to you and says, okay, I'll give you $2 for your corn, and then you $1.90 to produce it, you're going to say, okay, it would still be profitable for me to keep selling at this point because the cost of producing that ear corn with labor, with water, and the soil, and all of those things was less than the number that they're offering me. And so if I maximize my profit, I sell it at that point because that tends to profit in that case. This point right here is the point at which it costs you $2 to produce your corn, and no one offers $2 to purchase that ear corn. So that's where you're produce. At that point, you're indifferent. You say, it costs me exactly this much to produce this 1 ear corn, short-term costs, and I can't make more by selling less, and I can't make more by selling more. I'll make less actually, but if I sell more or less than this. And so this is your point where you would stop producing. Whatever quantity this is, how many more offer. Okay. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm being told that we have a bad connection online. So my internet right now because I have full Wi-Fi service. I'm not sure if it's choppy on YouTube. I don't know if you can rewind and watch it. That would be one suggestion I would have. I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to keep going, and I hope that this is actually being saved on YouTube. If it is, hopefully you guys can just go back and have a signal on your end. Because I think the signal's okay in my place right now. I don't know if it's changing when I'm not looking at it, but I think that's all we can do. So, okay, so that's not really part of the problem necessarily. I was wanting to explain that issue that over here it's the case that if you sell one more, you lose money, a little bit of money, and if you sell one less, you don't lose might have profit in your economic profit. Over here, at this other point, where your marginal cost intersects with the price point that you chose, that's not the case. Here, if someone offers you $2, it's $2 to sell that, so that's true. But if you sell, you need to sell more, your marginal price will go down. Each additional person that offers you $2 is you're actually going to be making more each person. So for example, right here, it might be $1.50 that you're making, that you spend on producing this ear corn, but you actually get $2 for that ear corn. And so you want to keep producing in all this area where your marginal cost is less than 5. And so that's not the case anymore at this point. It's not the case before this point. So that's why we produce. Well, this final point where the marginal cost is is at the price point. Okay, so let me look at the problem again. So this is a scenario in which individual corn farmers are earning a profit. In your slide, it marks this is 120. And so if we wanted to actually calculate economic profit, we would do $2 minus 120 to get this length here. And to get this quantity here, we would have to know what this number was, but then it would be, if this was 100, then this length would be 100. So we would just 80 cents times 100 to actually calculate it. But we don't in this case draw a situation in which there is economic profit. Okay, so okay, so part B says, now show what would happen in the long run in this market according to the theory of the invisible hand. So let's see what the theory of the invisible hand says. Okay, so in the slides it says that Adam Smith's theory, that the theory of the invisible hand is that self-interested buyers and sellers will often result in the most efficient allocation of resources. Okay, so how we can interpret that in this is that supply is happening right here, right now. There are this many, these are the producers, and they're willing to supply at this in order to gain some economic profit, right? And run their businesses. But according to the theory of the invisible hand, we'll move to a place in the market where economic profit is actually reduced to zero. Which isn't to say that accounting profit is zero. I mean, you might see an actual profit, but economic profit will be reduced to zero. So this is how this works. So suppliers are seeing that that at the price point $2, they're making this much money. You know, this they're making this economic profit, and so they're going to actually move their. They're going to, because there's economic profit to be had in this market, because it's the case that this alternative is offering you this much extra economic profit, your revenue minus your explicit cost minus your implicit cost, more people are going to enter. It might be the case that more suppliers are going to enter into the market, or it might be the case that some of these suppliers, in an effort to capture more of this economic profit, will lower their prices so that customers will go to their. So in either case, whether it's the case that there are just more suppliers that enter the market, they see, oh wow, corn production is a really lucrative thing. Look how much economic profit there is there. More people will enter the market until it's the case that economic profit disappears and it just becomes where it'll end up being the average total cost curve, the marginal cost curve, and what the market will tend towards. I'm going to say it again because I'm afraid it wasn't loud enough. So as more suppliers enter the market, or as these current suppliers become more willing to supply a greater quantity at lower prices, we'll come up with a new equilibrium price. I'm actually going to draw this so that have to be corrected, right? Okay, so okay, so producers are going to start producing until the equilibrium point matches up with the marginal cost curve equals the average total cost curve. At that point, when we calculate the economic profit, what will we see? We'll see that we normally calculate it by finding the difference between the marginal cost curve and the average total cost curve. And in this case, right where they meet, there's going to be zero economic profit. Intermediate situations might be the case that suppliers are supplying here. In that case, there will still be some economic profit. There will still be economic profit amounting to that difference right there between the marginal cost curve and the average total cost curve. Just the idea is that as suppliers see that there's economic profit, they're going to keep entering the market until there's no more economic profit to be had in that industry. Until it's the case that that industry is as good as the other industries with economic profit. So that's for B. Okay, now it's asking for negative economic profits. I'm going to redraw some curves because it's getting messy up here. Okay, so I'm going to draw a scenario where a typical corn farm is experiencing negative economic profits. So I'm just going to draw a hypothetical supply and demand curve. And oh, sorry, that was draw. Okay, so we have supply and demand. Equilibrium quantity and price is right here. And right here. We'll say this is $1. Okay, so this is our equilibrium price. We don't know what this quantity is. And then over here, where we have our marginal cost and average total cost curve, we're going to draw this in a way where there's negative economic profit at this price point, $1, okay? What is that? How do we draw that? We draw it by putting the average total cost curve above the marginal cost curve. So I'm going to draw the average total cost curve higher. And the marginal cost curve so in this case, our marginal curve is below, which is what we want if we're looking to draw a graph of negative economic profits. And the negative economic profits are the space in between the marginal cost curve and the average total cost curve at the second point on the marginal cost curve. And we're going to just draw this line over from this point on the average total cost curve. So our negative economic profits amount to the area in this space. So what we're seeing is we're getting $1 for an ear of corn here. and our average cost of producing the corn is above that. And it's also the case that yeah, our average cost of producing the corn is above $1. Say it's like $1.20. And here we're being offered, right here we might be offered 90 cents. And here we might be offered $1.10. And so in terms of marginal cost, we're not going to produce, we're not going to produce it, we're not going to sell at 90 cents because it's losing 10 cents economic profit that we can capture by selling it. And the marginal cost is $1. And here we're not going to produce because it costs, I'm sorry, we would be producing this 90 cents. This is saying that the cost of producing is 90 cents. We were offered $1. So we would produce that one. We would stop producing right here because that's where the marginal cost is $1. And the cost of producing is, so that's where the price is $1 and the cost of producing that year corn is $1. And here we would not produce because the price is above, the cost is $1.10 for producing 1 year corn, and we'd only be paying $1. So we don't produce beyond this point, we produce this area, but we still have negative economic profits because marginal cost is below the average total cost per. So that's part C. Okay. And then part D is kind of similar to part B. It says, according to the theory of the invisible hand, graph what will happen in the long run. So here, if corn farmers or typical corn farmers experiencing negative profit, then they're not going to be willing to stay in the market for very long if they're experiencing negative economic profit. That means they would make more money and be more profitable, and so they're not going to be willing to stay in this market. So what's going to happen is there are going to be fewer suppliers. They're going to drop out of the market, or they're going to increase the price that they're willing to supply at or something, and they will do there's no negative economic profit anymore. So once it's you might as well just stay if there's no economic profit and there's no negative economic profit. So the supply curve will just move, get to the point where marginal cost equals average total cost. So the supply curve in my drawing, which is not great, is going to change dramatically. So that the new supply will be about right there, where the equilibrium price ends up making it so that the marginal cost equals average total cost. I think that is a problem. Oh, part E says describe a barrier to entry that might limit the opportunity for other corn producers to enter corn production market in the long run. Okay. So a barrier to entry is any force that prevents firms from entering a market in the long run. So one barrier to entry might be the case that you have a market of scale. And so maybe there's a large farm that can produce one more ear of corn much more efficiently than others. And so it might not be the case that every farmer's marginal cost curve looks the same, or that every farmer's average total cost curve looks the same. And so if you have one farmer who's producing it much more efficiently and can produce an ear of corn for much less than $1 and much more of the time, And if it's the case that their average total cost is lower because maybe land is cheaper as you buy more of it, and so they have a huge farm, so they can produce a lot more with a lot cheaper. Or maybe in the case that they have less expensive workers in an area where it's not as expensive to produce, or they have a lower minimum wage or something, then that might be the case that they can produce it much more efficiently. In which case, different farms might have different marginal and average total cost curves. An efficient producer might not look like this. They might not have negative economic profit, and so they would be benefiting. Whereas maybe a smaller, not quite as efficient, is experiencing negative economic profit here. So they have to drop down the number they're willing to supply or raise prices or whatever. And so that'd be a barrier to entry because they just don't have the means of producing the same rate that the other farmers do. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's number 3. If you guys have questions, Kathy will check her email, so send those in the next minute or so. I'm just going to get ready for the next problem and move on if we don't get any more questions. Also, if you guys are having trouble hearing me or anything, please let me know. I'm trying to get louder, but okay. The next problem I will go over is number 6, the equilibrium problems in the price floor and price ceilings. Okay, I'm going to go into number 6 now. And the problem says, consider the market for labor where potential workers are the supply and firms are the demand. Let's say there is a minimum wage, a price floor. What will happen to the equilibrium price and quantity of workers hired? Okay, so potential workers are supply. And the people demanding them are firms. Okay. So this is where the market would tend towards. This is the equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. And in that situation, if there were no price floors, we would have this much consumer surplus and this much producer surplus. But when we have a price floor, we don't always get to equilibrium. Okay, so when we have a price floor, we don't always get to this equilibrium price. So let's say this point is $10 an hour, and there would be 75 people that would want to work for $10 an hour. Actually, that's probably not a good example because minimum wage is usually lower than that. So let's say the price is $5. There would be 75 people willing to work for $5 an hour. That's what our equilibrium point is. If there are no minimum wage requirements or anything. What happens when you have a minimum wage requirement is the government comes in and says you can't pay someone less than $8 an hour. You just can't do it. It's not good for people. And so what happens is the quantity demanded and supplied goes down. We no longer are producing at this point because there are going to be less suppliers willing to there are going to be less firms demanding at the price point $8. So when workers are costing $8, that's the amount that firms are going to demand. Let's say it's 60. Firms are going to say, okay, if we have to pay people $8 an hour, we can only afford to hire 60 people now. Or we only want to hire 60 people now. The number supplied at that point is going to be the same. And so this area here is going to be dead weight loss. These are all the people and so these are all of the potential workers and all the firms that were willing to do business with each other, but won't be able to now because they're only willing to do so when the price is less than $8 an hour. So mostly because of the suppliers, right? Suppliers are going to say, well, we would have been willing to produce, we would have been willing to hire 75 people at $5, but we can't anymore. And so this is all the economic profit that's lost. So this person here, this potential worker here, was willing to work for, might have been willing to work for $4, and they would have been paid $5. So they would have gotten that much surplus out of that transaction, right? So they're like, wow, I was willing to work for $4, I would have gotten paid for $5. But that situation isn't occurring anymore because suppliers aren't producing there. They're only producing up to the $8 point. And so there are going to be individuals that get trapped inside this triangle where they can't actually, they're not in the market anymore. Well, they're in the market, but there was no longer demanded at that price. So the question says, what will happen to the equilibrium price and the quantity of workers hired? Equilibrium price is going up from this point, right? Going up to $8. But the equilibrium quantity is going down this much. Going down by 15. So equilibrium price goes up, but the equilibrium quantity goes down, and there's dead weight loss because not everyone that would have been involved in the market and was willing to at certain price points is still able to be. Okay, so number 7 is pretty similar. It says to consider the market for apartment rentals, and let's say that there's a rent control, so price ceiling, what will happen to the equilibrium price and quantity of apartments rent? Okay, so there are this many suppliers of apartments. This is their supply curve. This is the demand curve for apartment rentals. And this is where the natural equilibrium would be. So this is where the natural equilibrium would be if it were the case that there was no price ceiling. So let's say it would be $1,000 for apartment prices, and the quantity demanded at that price would be 100 apartments. When we have a price ceiling, that means that it's probably the case that for some reason the government thinks that this is too much money for suppliers to be charging for their apartments. So they're going to say, you can't go all the way up to the equilibrium price. We're going to hold you $800 for an apartment. We don't really think that you should be charging. It's not fair. So that's going to bring the equilibrium. So where suppliers are going to be willing to supply is going to be at this new quantity, which is, I don't know, maybe 75 apartments. And the demanders are going to, the economic will be lost, will be this area here. That's the dead weight loss. So it says, what will happen to the equilibrium price and quantity of apartments rented? The equilibrium price goes down by this much, so down $200, and the equilibrium quantity goes down by this much, minus 25 apartments, and so that's how that works out. But the idea is that there's a price ceiling, that means that the government's trying to keep from going up to probably where equilibrium is. And if there is a minimum wage, that means they're probably not wanting things to get below. They don't want things to get all the way down to the equilibrium. So they'll probably for minimum wage laws, it'll be the case that the government's pushing up the equilibrium, and for price ceilings, they'll be pushing down the equilibrium price. Okay, so that's number 6 and 7. If you have any questions, couldn't hear me or anything, email Kathy and let us know. Otherwise, I'm going to get started on number 8 in a minute. We only have one viewer right now, so I wouldn't be surprised if we're not getting questions. I wonder if there really are some technical glitches on there. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to number 8. So this is a video on YouTube where Ron Paul talks about organ transplants. And it says, so number 8 says, how does Ron Paul describe the market for organs? So he argues that right now people aren't allowed to sell organs, even though people can sell other types of donations, and that because people can't sell organs, there's a shortage of organs. There are more people that are demanding organs than are being supplied. And so if we let people sell organs, we would save lives. So Ron Paul is suggesting that there is a market, a supply and demand market for organ transplants. And he's saying that there are a certain number of people that are willing to supply. There's certain people who are willing to donate their organs when they're not paid anything, when the price is zero. But that there would be more people willing to supply their organs and donate organs if they were able to be paid for them, which is what these two graphs suggest. And actually, you know, I'm going to, let's see here. Part A says, if I were to graph this, what assumptions would I make about supply and demand? I would probably say that these two things would be inelastic, and so I'm going to draw these. So supply, like something like that, pretty inelastic. I'm sure it's the case that even when, so this is to say that even when people are offered money for their organs, there's still going to be only so many people that are willing to offer their organs. There are only so many people that are going to be motivated by price, and they might not be that motivated by it. Like, I really like my kidneys, or I really like having, you know, that's not going to change if someone offers me a couple $1,000s necessarily. And so it's going to be pretty inelastic. So it's not, you know, this would be an elastic supply curve, but it's pretty inelastic, pretty vertical. The demand for organs, I would think is probably even more inelastic. When it comes to your health, people are oftentimes willing to pay any price, right? I mean, if we don't have our health, what do we have? So it's often the case that even if the price is really high or if the price is really low, there's only going to be a small change in the number of procedures or the amount of health that is demanded. People still want to be healthy, and it doesn't really matter if you lower the price. Even if you lower the price a ton, the quantity demanded of health-enhancing activities is still going to be pretty high. So that's why I'm drawing it like that. That's why I assume that it would be pretty inelastic. Okay, so the next part of so that's part A. I just explained my assumptions about why it would be inelastic. So Ron Paul says this many are supplied when the price is zero, but look how many we could supply if the price wasn't zero. We would have a lot more organs being supplied, and people would be willing to pay for them, and people would be willing to supply them and more often if this market were actually allowed to exist. So the result of introducing a market would be that we would have a greater number of organs supplied. People would be paying this price for them. And quite a lot of economic would be created. Because right now, all of this area, this triangular area, is the deadweight loss, which is a ton, right? Even more than with the price ceiling or minimum wage, because here it's not even the case that they're limiting the market. It's the case that they, well, it is the case they're limiting the market, but they're not even allowing the market to exist. So this is a huge deadweight loss of people that would both like to supply and really need organs that would be willing to pay for them. So part C says graph the market for organs and what would you do to address any problems. Kathy, I have a question for you on this part, actually. What did he talk about in lecture in terms of like what kind of problems he meant with okay, so part C says to address any problems. Not the slides don't really talk about this, and so I'm not really sure what he talked to you guys about in class about in terms of specific problems. So I don't know. Perhaps this might be something, but perhaps it would be a problem that suppliers would donate in risky situations. I know there's one example of so maybe it's the case that when offered an amount of money, which for organs would probably be a lot of money. It might be the case that you're offered several $1,000s for an organ if this market were allowed to exist, because I can't imagine that people would be willing to sell their organs a small amount of money. And so if this market were allowed to exist, it might be the case that supply, maybe people are offered $10,000 for a kidney. And if that's the case, then there might be people who try to supply organs who shouldn't supply organs, who are going to put themselves in too much jeopardy or something. Maybe someone in a financial crisis would come and try and sell an organ, and that would be, ethically questionable, to say the least. And this is also something that actually happens when people are offered money to donate blood. So it turns out that when you don't pay anyone to donate blood, the only reason that people have to go donate blood is like the kindness of their heart, right? They're only doing it because they want to do a good thing. But as soon as you introduce money into the equation, there are other motivations for donating blood. And so even if it's the case that you shouldn't be donating blood, I have a cold, they've told me I shouldn't donate when I don't tell them I have a cold so that I can get paid. The number of bad blood is going to go up. The costs are going to increase for the supplier because they're going to have to find out later on that the blood was contaminated. Just when motivations change like that in the market situation, there can be ethically really serious issues. And so that might be one thing that you would, one problem that would be the case if this market happened, which is maybe why it hasn't happened. Because the idea of being able to sell your organs if you, by a certain price, it might be morally questionable in many cases. So how would we address this problem? We'd probably make really strict rules about when you can donate and whether or not you can assume so much risk for your own health for donation. Probably would have to do a lot of tests beforehand to make sure that you were able to donate. Things like making sure that you haven't been coerced to donate. Things like that would probably have to be done if this market were ever allowed to exist. Okay, so that's number 8. If you have any questions, send them into Kathy. Email address is up here. And if not, I will see what else we can do. Also, I see we have a viewer right now. If you wouldn't mind, would you just email us in if you can see everything and if there aren't technical glitches, or let us know if you're experiencing any, just so I know kind of where everyone's standing on the other end, because we usually have more viewers than this, and so I was just wondering if everyone is having problems viewing. Viewer is, please let Kathy know how it's going for you. Did you get an email saying anything about helpful? Are there any questions in there that you would like to go over specifically on problem set 5? You did? Good. That's good. Maybe that's why there are no viewers. Maybe it's an easy problem set. Okay, guys, so I'm going to, these are the questions that were most requested from this problem set, and I'm going to end here. I'm just in case there are technical glitches and no one is able to see this, so I'm going to check out what's going on and figure that out. So I hope that it was helpful for you to go over these 5 problems. And we're not going to have office hour session on Saturday this week. I have a personal commitment, so I can't come. But I will see you guys next Tuesday.